Episode 1 of 1883 begins in the Great Plains. Or, as our first bit of narration so eloquently puts it, hell. For those unaware, 1883 is a prequel series to the wildly popular Yellowstone, depicting the rise of the Dutton family long before they operated the largest ranch in the U.S. Our first scenes open with Elsa, who steps up and looks out at the devastation before her, shell-shocked as her carriage is reduced to a burning wreckage. Indians swarm the area. Elsa comes at them with a gun in a blind rage. The echoes of this attack soon cast us back through time to Shay Brennan. He heads inside his house, struggling to hold back his tears as his family have succumbed to the horrors of smallpox. This deadly disease has ravaged his home, and with little other choice, he burns it all to the ground. Now, Shay happens to be a captain, and after flirting with the idea of committing suicide, Shay heads out with his partner Thomas for a big job. En route they notice bandits attempting to take out a carriage. The farmer aboard, whom we soon find out is James Dutton, holds his own and fends them off. James arrives in Fort Worth, deep in the heart of Texas. He's meeting his family there, much to the warnings of various vendors. It's a dog-eat-dog world here, and he's implored to make sure he knows how to use a gun when trouble shows up. And it doesn't take long before a pickpocket takes off with his wallet. James immediately establishes himself, shooting the pickpocket in the back and taking his wallet back. The townsfolk meanwhile are enraged and immediately string him up for this crime. Now, Shay and Thomas watch all of this unfold from afar, eventually heading in to warn a whole caravan of travelers that this journey is going to be dangerous. Very few of them speak English, but for a translator by the name of Joseph, Shay encourages him to sell their oxes and exchange them for horses. Shay is shocked at their lack of preparation, and even more so when he finds out they don't have any guns either. This job we heard about comes from moving these guys 2,000 miles, and after seeing how ill-prepared they are, Shay wants to renegotiate a new fee. It's going to be more than $200 per family, and they need extra protection for the journey. They certainly won't be ready in the morning. Remember James' family? Well, they're riding on the train and happen to include Elsa, the woman we saw from the opening of the chapter. James has another son, John, and they're riding along with James' sister Claire and his niece Mary. They arrive in town on a train, but Claire is certainly disapproving of Elsa's disobedience, heading off to a different carriage and naively walking into an unnerving encounter with a businessman who talks sweetly to her. Meanwhile, Shay and Thomas catch up with James at the bar. He's going to continue heading up north, but Shay and Thomas decide they should collaborate and ride together. Now, Shay is haunted by the memories of his past involving his wife Helen. One of the whores talks a big game, understanding Shay's troubles and deciding he should call her Helen instead. Well, she gets a shove and a threat for her troubles. Back at the motel, a drunk man arrives and breaks into Elsa's room. He immediately notices Elsa and tries to rape her. Thankfully, James arrives and immediately shoots the man dead. This is enough for James to make his choice and join up with Shay and Thomas, deciding to ride with them. Shay and the others check every single traveler for smallpox before they go, though. Unfortunately, one of the men and his family have the pox, and he needs to leave town. If he doesn't, it could spread everywhere. With this cleared up, at least for now, Shay, Thomas, and James make plans for camp as they prepare to. Episode 2 of 1883 opens with a haunting scene of dead soldiers, as a black and white image turns to color. We're a year earlier than our current timeline, at the Dunker Church during the aftermath of the Battle of Antietam. Much like the first chapter, we open with one of the Dutton family awakening, close-up shots of James' face that soon pave way for showing numerous dead bodies lining the floor. Back in the present, the caravan makes camp at Trinity River in Texas. Unlike the harsh, inhospitable world of Fort Worth, Trinity River is heaven by comparison. Elsa's narration is poetic and beautiful, with one line mentioning how the trees are dotted about like little villages. However, that beauty is a facade given the horror hidden in the long grass. A destroyed carriage plays host to several skeletal bodies, while the threat of smallpox and other nasty illnesses loom ever nearer. In camp, some of the Germans ignore the advice given and begin drinking from the river. Claire scoffs at this when she notices, better to die out here than on the trail. While she stays quiet over its effects, Elsa tries to talk with them. When James shows, he simply tells her to saddle Lightning, their horse, allowing the travelers to succumb to their fate and stupidity. We've known for a while that Elsa isn't like other women here, and James' nicely worded dialogue about decent men typifies this nicely. He sees his daughter not as a stay-at-home girl, but as one of the riders, and more than capable to hold her own. Out in the wild, as the sun pokes its head lazily above the horizon, the horse riders all join together to round up some wild cattle. There are some absolutely gorgeous shots here, and for anyone who's been there to watch a sunrise over the horizon, it really is an amazing experience. Anyway, in their absence, things take a horrible turn. Back in camp, a whole bunch of arrogant cowboys show up. After allowing their horses to drink by the river, Claire appears and throws rocks at them. Margaret eventually pulls a shotgun when things turn violent, leading to a big fight around camp. I say fight, it's a bit of a massacre in truth, as many of the Germans wind up dead. When Shay, Thomas, James and the others ride back to camp, they scoop up Joseph, the English-speaking German, and head to Fort Worth to find those responsible and speak to the marshal. In the saloon, a shaky Joseph points out the culprits, who are subsequently killed for their actions. This singular action is bound to spark some backlash, and Shane knows that. He warns that there's going to be heat on them now, and they best be ready to move out in the morning. One of the big casualties this episode is Mary, Claire's daughter. She dies in the earlier shooting, and her ill temper and cold demeanor now make a lot more sense. James tries to convince her to join them on the road, but this is the straw that breaks the camel's back. She's had 7 children, and all 7 have died before her. It's too much for anyone to bear, and Claire is now done. She's going to stay at Trinity River. While the rest of the caravan move on, James stays behind as Claire takes a gun and kills herself. James does the noble thing and digs a grave for her. Shay shows and admits he admires her courage, joining him in digging the grave. Episode 3 of 1883 begins with the threat of death ever present. Our caravan is stalked every step of the way, and many of these men and women are dying. Whether it be through snake bites, fallen wagons or possessed dogs, it looks like many are going to perish before they make it to Oregon. The biggest obstacle they've had to face is still to come though, and that comes in the form of a river. James and Shay are aware of this, and it's a big problem that cripples the entire caravan. The country to the west is rough, which is where James suggests they go, while Shay deliberates over going the longer path and increasing their journey time to the east. It's not much of a negotiation in truth, and to be honest either way it's going to be tough going. If they try and cross the river where they are though, a good deal of them will drown. After their heated exchange of words, Thomas worries that James is undermining Shay's authority. In camp, Thomas and Shay run into a gypsy by the name of Nomi. She's having trouble with her horses, but Shay gives her some solid advice. Her 2 boys haven't drunk anything for a fair while either, which certainly concerns the grizzled old man. He offers them canteens of water. Shay promises to help but sternly rejects Nomi's sexual advances, making it clear that he'll get her to Oregon, but won't be marrying her. Thomas begins talking to Nomi and learns that one of the men in camp has stolen all of her things. This betrayal, stealing from their own, brings Shay into cutting the thieves' horses loose, messing up their wagon, and taking the resources back to Nomi. Shay also promises to kill them if they go the same way they are. With a bag over his shoulder, Shay confronts Joseph and implores him to control his people. If he can't, then it'll be up to him to pick someone else to lead them forward. Thomas has concerns over Shay's behavior, reminding him that they need these travelers to trust them if they want to make the journey in one piece. In camp, Elsa volunteers herself to help Ennis with the herd. James is not sure this is a good idea, but Margaret decides to join her, intent on keeping an eye on the young woman. Ennis has more than herding on his mind though, and as Margaret and Elsa approach, those intentions are very obviously clear. Nothing happens but it's definitely bubbling up. While this is going on, James takes John out hunting. He's taught how to hunt a deer. It's a big stag too and enough to feed the camp for a week. James teaches him the art of honoring the kill, staining his cheeks with blood as they head back to camp with their kill. When James arrives, Shay is there waiting for him. Shay tells James that heading east may be easier, but it'll add another 3 weeks to their journey. So naturally, they're going to go west. Although Shay does begrudgingly agree, he points out James questioning his authority and how that's damaging for the whole journey. James only cares about his only family though, he doesn't care about the politics among the traveling rabble of foreigners. Eventually though they do agree to head out together. That night, the robber from earlier attempts to rally the people to his cause, moaning about Shay's leadership. Shay certainly makes his point clear that night, drawing his gun at a lightning-quick speed and reminding the sobbing man that killing him would mean absolutely nothing, especially not after the massacres he's faced in the past. When the robbers do eventually leave, Shay tells the rest of the foreigners to police themselves or he and Thomas will step in. They're going to leave in the morning, but before they go, he implores them to collect up water, boiling it before drinking, of course. Leaving these robbers alive has an adverse effect too. It puts the caravan in grave danger, given the men may well go back to Fort Worth, collect up a whole bunch of thieves, and approach the caravan as revenge. Shay is aware of this, especially when he talks to Thomas and bemoans his conscience for not killing them. Will it come back to haunt Shay in the future? As the caravan starts moving, the threat of death moves with them, leaving plenty of dangers in the near future. Episode 4 of 1883 Season 1 begins with Elsa reflecting on their journey so far. The further west they travel, the more the rules and customs they've been bound by become a burden. This is the Wild West after all, and Elsa quickly realizes she's not dressed appropriately for it. So naturally she trades gold for some trousers and begins to dress the part. The large, unforgiving river continues to be the big obstacle here, and our lead group Shay, Thomas, Joseph, Grady, and James all discuss crossing and what sacrifices that may entail. James agrees to help ferry people across, agreeing to wait until the water heats up in order to make an easier passage. When Shay calls James a farmer, he immediately curses him out and reminds him that's not what he is. The thing is, talking back is becoming contagious with others in the group starting to follow suit. This is something Shay is quick to point out to Thomas in confidence. The other important point here stems from the crossing itself. Once everyone crosses the river, there's no way back. While Shay admits the unknown is what scares him, Thomas is quick to put that into perspective, pointing out he's never been whipped like Thomas has. Now that is worth fearing. James decides to move the wagon across the water in the dead of night, ahead of everyone else. He heads out to tell Elsa, but while she's singing, Ennis shows and kisses her. Unfortunately, this happens right in the view of James. Things are tense, especially when he rides up to them. Taking Elsa aside, she admits that she likes him. For James that's fine, given he's treating her like an adult. Margaret though? Well, that's a whole different ballgame. Something that Elsa will need to tell her mother herself. The water is deep and Margaret is worried, although she claims not to be, especially when she sees James struggling to control his horse and make it to the other side. When the time comes, she does manage to move the wagon across without any complications, but they're experienced travelers. The others? Not so much, and that's where the worry stems. Shay's ghosts soon come to haunt him that night. He's back in the heat of battle, watching as numerous comrades are shot down, cannonballs whiz overhead and deadly clouds of dust are a constant reminder of the devastation war can cause. When Shay bolts upright in the middle of the night, breathing heavily and calling out, Thomas comments how he hasn't seen this before from him. With James already on the other side of the river, he speaks to Shay from the other side of the river and promises to help them all pass. The thing is, the river has risen overnight, and Shay tells the others that they need to unload any unessential gear to make the crossing. Shay was quite clear that they travel light, and upon finding unnecessary gear in all their wagons, he's livid. In fact, he leaves the riders with an ultimatum: unload what's not needed, or Shay will burn their wagons to the ground. In the wake of this, the ground is left covered with relics of all kind: tables, chairs, cabinets and musical instruments. Elsa soon shows up with Ennis and Wade in their absence, marveling at this wooden graveyard. When she happens upon the piano, Ennis encourages her to play like she used to. So naturally she plays Moonlight Sonata by Beethoven. As this plays, we cut back to the river as we see snippets of the harsh, perilous journey across the deep river. Elsa continues to play, struggling to hold back sobs. Following this song, they continue on, crossing the river where a lowly wagon, trinkets and dead bodies show the significant struggle it's been to cross. This has been a difficult journey, and the longer it goes on the more our characters realize that the land will never love them. Episode 5 of 1883 Season 1 picks up with us back on the road to Oregon. Shay surveys the river, stifling tears as Thomas shows up. It turns out the wagon that perished in the river was actually holding all the food, and that's a massive problem. They need to resupply, but that's not what's eating Shay up. He takes full responsibility for the river tragedy, believing he's making too many widows, which obviously hits home for him, given he is, himself, a widower. There's 43 travelers left, and it seems the food wagon stockpiling all their food in one place is a direct result of a thief in their midst. Joseph is quick to point out that all these travelers on the road are not a family and barely know each other. Not only that, he knows exactly who the thief is. Meanwhile, a rift begins to grow between James and Margaret. Given Elsa has been spending a week with the herd and Ennis, she's uneasy with Elsa drifting away from them. In fact, Margaret decides to ride out and see her. With a motherly touch, Margaret discusses the notion of love and tries to caution her away from Ennis. When Elsa mentions feeling butterflies and looks dreamily at her lover, Margaret realizes that they're going to have the chat. As they bathe together in the river, Margaret tells her she needs to follow the rules of her heart, giving consent for the pair to be together. In Margaret's absence, Shay and Thomas call on James to help with the thief problem. They act as mediators, watching from afar as Joseph tries to police the situation. As things start to get out of hand, James jumps in and clears everything up. Shay throws money back to the two thieves, demanding they find their own way. He promises to kill them both if they try and follow the caravan. With strength in numbers, leaving behind this many travelers is certainly an ominous sign. Even more ominous, however, is Wade's dangerous warning. Bandits are following them, and that means Elsa needs to stay with James for her own protection. Inevitably, she ends up with Ennis outside that night, who admits he tried to sleep with a hooker back in town, but she didn't make him feel like Elsa does, and thus it didn't work. As the pair make love, Margaret awakens in the middle of the night and sees them together. This inevitably leads to Margaret having a stern talk with Elsa in the morning. She warns that if Elsa brings a child into the world, she won't be raising it for her. Margaret obviously has trouble accepting her daughter isn't a little girl anymore, but at the same time Elsa's naivety is something that could cause big problems in the future. For Elsa though, she sees it as the freedom of choice, and right now, things are looking up, given she's very much in love. Elsewhere, Shay and James come to blows once more. This time it comes from Shay wanting James to give up his rations. The thing is, James doesn't budge, and Shay knows he can't risk fighting with him in front of the caravan, leaving them at something of a stalemate. Wade's warning comes to pass, as bandits show in the middle of the night, and attack the thieves left behind. They come in numbers, with guns ready, and take everything. Black smoke rises on the horizon, signifying the bandits on their tail. James realizes he needs guns and lots of them. They're going to take the fight to these crooks, but that involves formulating a plan at camp. On the way, James sucker punches Ennis and knocks him off his horse. He knows about him and Elsa. As James looks set to beat him down, Elsa appears and stops him, pointing out how much she loves him. Ennis too remains devoted to the woman, pointing out how he'd even steal her if need be to keep their love alive. Eventually James realizes their devotion is true and tells Ennis to cradle Elsa's heart like an egg and make sure it doesn't crack. Back at camp, the gang make a plan and lure the bandits out to attack a solitary wagon left behind while the caravan rides on. This belongs to Joseph, and he's well aware of what's happening. With a shotgun in hand, he takes a deep breath and prepares to hit back with the others. In the ensuing fight with the bandits, Ennis is killed. As he drops off the horse, right at the end of this battle, he turns to James and tells him that he loved her. It's a heartbreaking moment, and one that sees Elsa hurry up and see her lover for the last time. As she narrates, death's rotten finger touches her, and with it, her view of the world changes. The naivety and hopeful innocence fades, and in its place, hot blood-fueled rage. Grabbing the pistol from earlier, she kills the final bandit in Episode 6 of 1883 sees the caravan head toward Doan's Crossing. This happens to be a border town of sorts, and somewhere the gang can catch their bearings and prepare for the next leg of their journey. Elsa is consumed with grief, but out of all the people who know what she's going through, it's Shay who shows with wise words of wisdom. After burning his house down and losing his wife, Shay admits he has his own reasons for living. Shay believes no one is left to love him, but he's bound for the ocean to fulfill his own promise and dream to his beloved. It's a really beautiful and touching chat, one that perfectly exemplifies how Elsa is feeling. In fact, it's so touching that Elsa returns to work, albeit still grieving. When the gang make it to Doan's Crossing, Margaret seizes the opportunity to take a ride with her daughter. They head into town, but it's not exactly a welcome reception. People stare, untrusting, as the two women pass. Given Elsa's current mood, a man in the crowd challenges her. With the pair drawing guns, James arrives and manages to save the situation from blowing completely out of control, lamenting Elsa's foolishness. The thing is, that blinding rage is bound to get them in trouble if it's not control, and James knows that. He orders Elsa to leave and return to the caravan. Thomas works his magic in town to convince a cook to jump aboard and help the caravan in their upcoming travels. He has some pretty strict but fair rules, although it'll cost $600 to get him aboard. Given the lack of resources and cooks from here to Wyoming, his rates are justifiably steep. Another new addition to the roster is Colton, a young and charismatic cowboy hired to replace Ennis. As one may expect, this goes down as well as a lead balloon with Elsa. He apologizes for what happened to Ennis, admitting that he actually knew the man. He was a good hand. Colton says. Realizing she's in mourning, he respectfully keeps his distance. At least for now. Unfortunately, there's a bigger problem afoot here than grief. There's a river blocking their path and the caravan are going to have to cross again. Shay bemoans that they're losing time. We should be in Kansas by now. The thing is, this is a tough crossing, and after this, they've got the desert and then the mountain to tackle. Shay believes in tough love, determined to have the immigrants fend for themselves in order to survive. Thomas is far more understanding and level-headed than his partner, unsure whether this is actually a good place to teach them a lesson. On top of hiring a cook, Thomas also buys a gift for Nomi. Specifically, that of a mirror. His reasoning comes from her beauty and wanting her to look at herself. The thing is, Thomas taking care of her and buying Nomi gifts are acts of love unto themselves, and Nomi soon talks him around. Under the flickering lights of their campfire, Nomi strips off and kisses him. In the morning, she holds Thomas's hand and stops him from calling her ma'am, replaced with the much more intimate and informal Nomi. In the morning, Elsa manages to come to terms with her grief, partly thanks to a chat with her father, but mostly from Shay's words. When he arrives to see her by the river crossing, Elsa kisses Shay's cheek and crosses to the other side. Episode 7 of 1883 starts with the caravan on the move, navigating across the vast expanse of dry, flat plains. There's been nothing but grass for them to look at in over a week. The plains are also ominously littered with bones, an eerie bit of foreshadowing, given the skeletal remains of animals and the makeshift gravestones. This land belongs to the Indians though, and as the caravan crosses, they pay their tax on the land. Thomas decides to make camp where they are, partly thanks to there being water in the land. And if that earlier chat about skeletons wasn't enough, the new resident cook kills a buffalo and starts prepping it for the caravan. His use of the F word doesn't go down too well, especially with Margaret, and Shay is quick to remind him not to overstep his boundaries. Interestingly, Elsa starts talking with one of the Indians, a charismatic chap by the name of Sam. He chose this name as that's the name of the man who killed his wife. He took his name as a reminder of what happened. Elsa admits her horse is called Lightning. Why? Well, apparently that's how fast her horse is. In order to prove that theory, Elsa decides they should race. James claps his hands together in delight, while Elsa ends up winning. After, she cuts off some of her hair and hands it over to Sam, a memento after he called her lightning yellow hair. In return, he hands over a trinket of his own given she won the race. That night, Shay gets talking to the Indians. Apparently there are a lot of bandits up ahead, and even worse, their caravan is going to be the perfect pickings for them. It's an ominous warning, and it doesn't take long for a storm to swell and cause the wind to pick up. That wind becomes ever more ferocious, and James encourages the gang to hitch the horses quickly. The cattle are also gone, leaving them all stuck in a desperate situation. If that wasn't enough, a tornado arrives. It's tense, and as everyone drops to the ground to ride this out, Sam and Elsa end up kissing. When the tornado finally passes and the storm lifts, James heads off to try and find Elsa, while Margaret helps the caravan. The thing is, Sam joins Elsa on a horse as they head out to try and find the horses. When Sam returns to his horse, he shouts down to Elsa that she's free to come and go in his land at any time. There are massive problems for the caravan though. A lot of the wagons have been destroyed, and in the middle of nowhere, they may well have to double back and find more. Even worse, they haven't got any food either. The cattle are miles back, and they need men to try and round them up, especially as 6 bandits have rounded them up. Elsa demands she be taken alongside the men. Of course, Margaret is less than happy when she finds out and charges off to catch up and bring her daughter back. Unfortunately for Shay and the others, there aren't 6 men there. There are 13. Thankfully, Sam shows back up, alongside one of Shay's old friends, Charlie, and not only save Elsa's life, but also help fend off the bandits around James and the others. All 3 of them take gunshots for their troubles. Thankfully, James goes through his belt and is wedged near his butt. For Thomas, he has a ricochet in the stomach while Shay ends up shot, grazed across his forehead. A dribble of blood drips onto his shoe. As the episode closes out, Margaret is stopped by a bandit. She demands the woman hand over her horse, but instead, he receives a shotgun to the chest for his troubles. This traumatizes the poor woman, and as narration from Elsa tells us, she ends up sobbing that night. However, there are bigger problems afoot, and with the caravan scattered, little food and wagons smashed up, how on earth are they all going to survive? Episode 8 of 1883 begins with the caravan out on the plains. Sam's still there too, and alongside Elsa, James and the others, they begin herding some wild horse. Elsa continues to embrace this wild way of life, howling like a banshee as she works to round up the horses. Elsa has come a long way this season, and after ripping her pants, heads back to her caravan to begin stitching them up. Margaret is there though, and she suggests Elsa wear a dress, which is met with a vehement refusal. The thing is, dresses are her future, given that's where she's heading, and Margaret admitting all this hits her with bitter regret. The drama this episode though stems from where the caravan are heading next. James suggests they talk to the immigrants, while Shay deduces going back to Denver. That's something that won't fly with James. They're all interrupted by the arrival of Indians who are there to trade. James trades with one of the men, but takes a fancy to a Spanish helmet behind him. It's not for sale, he says, but is quick to mention how these men tried to take their land, but were cut down and stopped in their tracks. James is quick to reassure him though, telling him he's not there to take anything, but given the opening scenes in episode 1, this feels like a nice bit of foreshadowing. Charlie and Shay part ways, with the former admitting he thinks this is his last journey. This trip is not going to be easy, and Shay admits that with only 8 wagons, the old and young are going to have to ride inside, while everyone else walks on. The alternative is that they head back to Denver, which will take 6 weeks. The land there is not free though. Shay's choice is usurped by James, offering Joseph and the others the choice of joining them and heading north, where they can learn to ride and press on. Joseph decides to join him rather than head to Denver. Shay decides to turn leadership duties over to James, making him responsible for their well-being. Before they leave though, Sam helps show Elsa how to hunt and kill a buffalo. This symbolic act sees the Indians rally together and ride. Off the back of this, Elsa decides to stay with the Indians now. Following Elsa's bold proclamation, things escalate that night with her father. Given Elsa is 18, she deduces that she's a woman now and can do what she wants. Margaret fails to get through to her, and even in the morning she calls out Margaret for her hypocrisy. After all, she was in the fields working while James was in a cell rotting, and she was 17. As a compromise, she promises to ride with them until Oregon, but is going to stay with the Indians. Margaret wants them to exchange vows, but Elsa is done with God. She sees Sam as a sign from God and refuses to ask him for permission. With Shay on the verge of leaving, Thomas urges him to stay. After all, he's made a promise and he's going to see this through to the end and believes Shay should do the same thing. Eventually he agrees. Elsewhere, James catches up with Sam. After breaking a horse in, Sam hands the reins over to James and lets him ride to prove as much. While he marvels over the beauty of the plains, Margaret watches from afar and realizes that this is exactly where Elsa gets her spirit from. Sam and the other Indians aren't going near Oregon though, they're staying on the land they've made their own. He does promise to bring Elsa back if she changes her mind, but Elsa's tenacious spirit is not something to be tamed as easily as this horse, and James knows that. For now, Elsa and Sam part ways as the former agrees to ride with the others on to Oregon before parting ways for good. With the Indians leaving, Elsa lets the tears roll down her cheeks as she presses ahead with the others for the next step of the Episode 9 of 1883 begins with the caravan back on the move, uneasily passing through this dangerous country. Unfortunately, a rattlesnake bites Rissa's horse, knocking her down, which then in turn bites Joseph. While the caravan is stopped, James, Shay, and Thomas ride on and notice 6 sets of tracks leading away from a bloodbath. Numerous Lakota are dead, mostly women and children. Unfortunately, given they're all tracking around the camp, whoever rides through is undoubtedly going to think Shay and the caravan are responsible, and he curses his sloppiness. Joseph's bite is tended to, while Rissa struggles to keep liquids down. They're both in a rough way and things are looking bad. The only way to solve this issue is to find the bandits, stop them and bring their bodies back to the Lakota. If not, the Lakota are going to attack, and this could be a bloodbath. The caravan will need to stay put right now, including Elsa, who surprisingly doesn't tag along with James, Shay, and Thomas. Unfortunately, the resident new chef realizes what's happened and becomes spooked, deciding to ride out to the fort in order to hide. So naturally, the entire caravan follow him. With Margaret and Elsa alone, they've no choice but to join them. Margaret demands her daughter wear a dress though, reminding her that rocking up at the fort looking like a Native American is not going to do anyone any favors. Of course, this time the dress doesn't feel the same as it did earlier in the season, constricted, lacking freedom and hiding the new Elsa. Meanwhile, Shay, James, and Thomas ride out into the country and find the murderers, disguising themselves as deputies. Our guy are no strangers to hustlers, and the minute they admit to killing the Lakota, they shoot and kill the men. That's just as well too, given a whole rabble of Lakota find their women and children, going on the hunt. That hunt brings them to the caravan's cook, who is his wagon burned and destroyed. With Elsa watching from afar, the Lakota spot her, and immediately give chase. A big fight breaks out with the caravan, as Wade instructs them all to circle, while they prepare to fire. In doing so, we cut forward to the scenes we actually received at the start of episode 1. Elsa wakes up with the Lakota nearby and after shooting one dead, takes an arrow for her troubles. As she continues to fight the Lakota, speaking Comanche stops them from landing the killer blow. She manages to rationale with them, telling the men that Shay and the others are hunting the real killers of their kin. When they eventually leave, letting her go, Elsa stumbles on with her horse. She stumbles into the path of Margaret, who urges her to press on and make it to the fort. Before they get there though, they need to remove the arrow, and, as you can imagine, that's not a pretty sight. Elsa's screams pierce the air before she eventually passes out. James finds the Lakota, whose leader confirms to him that Elsa is the one who has stopped the fighting. With the battle over for now, James and the others catch up with Margaret, Elsa and the other rabble of survivors. James speaks plainly to his daughter that night, admitting that they need to get her to fort. The thing is, the blood was dark when the arrow was pulled out and, after talking to Elsa, learns in confidence that the arrow has pierced her liver. Examining the arrow himself, James notices how dirty it is and believes that Elsa is going to die. In order to honor her life, James decides to let her live out every sunrise and sunset and lie to her that she's going to be okay. When she dies, James promises to take her body with them and bury her wherever they make a life for themselves. Of course, this is a neat bit of foreshadowing given we know the Duttons end up in Montana. So lie is what they do. Margaret and James keep the pretense up that everything is fine. The thing is, Elsa is smart, and as she studies her father's eyes, she realizes the horrifying. In 1883 Season 1, Episode 10, entitled This Is Not Your Heaven, Elsa's days in this mortal coil are numbered. Written by Taylor Sheridan and directed by Ben Richardson, Episode 10 begins as our pioneers reach Fort Casper to seek medical help for gravely injured Elsa, Isabel May, Joseph Mark Rissman, and Rissa Anna Fiamora. With the fort abandoned by the army, the group is greeted by two young men who take James, Tim McGraw, Captain Shea, Sam Elliott, and the freshly collapsed Elsa to the doctor, Major Hemphill, Raphael Sparge. He's unable to do anything for Elsa, but as they are leaving, Shea discovers that the fort is now owned by the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, the same organization whose deputies murdered the Lakota women and children, and then were killed by James, Shea, and Thomas in retaliation. James returns to Margaret and tells her to prepare to travel north to Montana to find what will be Elsa's final resting place and their new home. Knowing the group is not safe, Shea tells the pioneers that they will winter in the Bozeman Valley before pushing on to Oregon in the spring. With Joseph incapacitated, a mutiny occurs, and the remaining settlers choose to continue on the trail to Oregon themselves without Shea. Seeing that Joseph and Rissa are in need of help, Nomi Gradiela Brancusi volunteers to drive their wagon, and she, Thomas, LaMonica Garrett, and her two sons choose to follow Shea and the Duttons to Montana to spend the winter with them. Elsa, Wade, James Landry Hebert, and Colton, Noah LaGrose share a sweet goodbye, and the two wranglers head back to Texas, leaving the cattle and the wagon party behind. Elsa opines that the foolish pioneer's future lay in the abyss of unmarked graves along the Oregon Trail. Unfortunately, her premonition is correct. Later that night at camp, Thomas looks at Joseph's rotting leg and tells him, "Your leg is dying, and the death is working its way up. Now we can take the leg or you can die with it." Joseph tells Thomas to take the leg, and Thomas enlists Shea, James, Margaret, and Nomi to help. Shea hands Joseph a bottle of whiskey and tells him to drink half of it to get so drunk you can't see straight. Joseph laughs and replies, "I'm German. Half this bottle, I'm just hitting my stride." This moment of levity is well needed because what follows is the graphic and brutal amputation of Joseph's leg. He lives through the procedure, which causes Elsa to weakly remark from her wagon, "Sure glad I ain't got shot in the leg." After they enter the Montana territory, James leaves the group to go hunting. Soon, Shea and Elsa are approached by three members of the Crow tribe. Elsa sees them and promptly collapses. Their leader, Spotted Eagle, played the legendary Graham Greene, offers to take her to his tribe so that they can care for her, but despite his people's best efforts, Elsa's fate is sealed. When James arrives at the camp, Spotted Eagle tells him solemnly, "The Lakota dip their arrows in manure so a hit is fatal, and an arrow to the liver is for certain." He goes on to recommend a piece of land in the Paradise Valley to James for his family to settle on, but warns him, "In 7 generations, my people will rise up and take it back from you." That seems fair enough to James. Realizing that she will certainly die, Elsa asks James if she can pick the spot where she is buried and he agrees. Later that night, Thomas and Nomi make plans to settle in Oregon together, while James and Shea sit by the fire. James asks Shea to help explain to Margaret that he and Elsa need to leave the group separately in the morning to find Elsa's grave. As the others make their plans, Joseph discovers that Rissa has died in her sleep. After a tearful goodbye with Margaret and Shea, Elsa and James make their way to Paradise Valley and the future home of the Yellowstone Ranch. The wilderness scenery is breathtaking as Elsa chooses her final resting place. "I'm not scared," Elsa says to James as she takes her last breath. At the end of the episode, the fate of the others is revealed. Shea, Thomas, Nomi, her sons and Joseph all make it to Oregon, and we cut to Sam, Martin Semsmeyer, waiting for Elsa in the spot he promised her in the spring. As Elsa appears on the horizon, the voiceover narration kicks in. My heaven is filled with good horses and open plains and wild cattle, and a man who loves me. Elsa's happy and finally. Upon their arrival at Fort Casper, Elsa, Shay, and James are surprised to be greeted by two teenagers instead of soldiers, evidence that the fort is no longer an army post. After Elsa collapses due to her injuries, a doctor, Major Hemphill, examines her. He is both rude and unhelpful, explaining that Fort Casper, where she might have gotten help, has been abandoned. Dejected, the group leaves, but not before Shay finds out that the Wyoming Stockgrowers Association, the group responsible for the slaughter of the Lakota women and children, has taken over Fort Casper. It won't take 'em long to find those deputies we killed. This whole country will be hunting us, Shay laments to James as they get back to the wagons. Shay and James decide to go north to Montana on the Bozeman Trail. When Thomas insists that Joseph and Rissa need medical attention, Shay reiterates, "There is no doctor. Just more of those thieves, and if we stay around here, they're gonna hang us." Upon hearing that, Thomas, Nomi, her boys, and Joseph choose to follow Shay and the Duttons north for the winter, rather than continuing on the Oregon Trail with the ill-fated pioneers. Elsa and James ride next to each other as they enter the Montana territory. Elsa observes, "Not sure what Oregon looks like, but I bet it don't look like this. Should have aimed for this place from the start." As he takes in the beauty of their surroundings, James agrees. Elsa goes on, "The only people who know what it looks like are already there. Funny when you think about it. All those people from Europe don't speak our language, don't know anything about this place, risking their lives over rumors and dreams." James replies wistfully, "Rumors and dreams build the whole world, honey." Their chat turns serious when Elsa says, "Want to know my greatest fear about dying? It's being forgotten, and I can't understand why, because I won't be here to know anyone forgot me." "Nobody gonna forget you," Elsa, James replies earnestly. When Elsa tells James that he looks at her like she's dying, James tells her, "I look at you for what you are. The most important thing to me on this planet. That comes with a lot of worry because I can't replace you." As Spotted Eagle and his people do all they can for Elsa, James tells him, "Where we put her in the ground is where we stay, and I gotta find that place fast." In an incredible act of kindness, Spotted Eagle gives him a gift. "I know a place for you. You go through that pass and you follow the river south. I used to hunt that valley as a boy. The winters are cruel, but the summers are rich. A man who plans can thrive, and you look like a man who plans. It is settled. Paradise Valley is where the Duttons will make their home." Spotted Eagle warns, "Know this. In 7 generations, my people will rise up and take it back from you." Undeterred, James tells him, "7 generations, you can have it." Looking out for his people, Spotted Eagle adds, "Someday my family might seek to hunt that valley, and if they do, you remember me and you let them." James graciously agrees. "Your family can hunt the day I get there and every day after." Yellowstone fans will remember in the season 4 premiere that James allows Red Bear, Gregory Zaragoza, and his family to bury his father in Paradise Valley. Looks like the Duttons did not forget Spotted Eagle's generosity. After we see Elsa die in James' arms at the base of a tree, we flash forward to 1 year later. True to his word, Shay has gotten Joseph to Oregon. We see Joseph on crutches taking off his wedding ring to start building his house on his newly acquired piece of land. Elsewhere in the Willamette Valley, Nomi, Thomas and her boys are about to stake out their land so that they can build their life together. "Is it too far?" Nomi asks Thomas, smiling. "Ain't nothing too far for us. If you want the river, I'll stake you a river," Thomas responds, excited for the future. In episode 6, Shay tells Elsa he was heading to Oregon to see the ocean because that was his wife's dream. Sure enough, the last time we see Shay is on the beach, watching the waves on the shore with tears in his eyes. A hummingbird flies right up to him, and Shay takes it as a sign his wife is with him. As the camera cuts to a long shot, we see Shay pull out his gun and kill himself so that he can join his beloved wife and daughter in the afterlife. Maybe you'll see Elsa there too. 1883 bows out its first season with a really solid finale, one that closes out its trip to Oregon with a somber and bittersweet ending to this ride. Joseph goes it alone, Shay meets his journey's end, while Thomas sets up his patch of land with Nomi, just as he promised. Meanwhile, there's James and his family, who find their patch off land and prepare for the next step of their journey. Given a good year has passed now, it seems 1883 is going to be closer to 1884 now, and it'll be interesting to see what new developments that brings for our characters next season. For now though, 1883 has been a really enthralling watch, and despite a slight blip toward the end of the season, there's a solid amount of work done to round out all of these characters and give a good send-off. Simultaneously though, this show sets things up nicely for a second season. In that respect, 1883 has done a really good job, although I do question the decision to have Elsa in her version of heaven with Sam, who's presumably dead too, I guess, rather than her first love, given that had a far greater impact on her life. Still, that's a nitpick in what's otherwise been a very good season. Roll on season 2,